everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. This week I am continuing on with my 1950s tulip dress project. You can see the bodice and the pockets of it there in the background, but this is the design here. And this week I am actually going to start with how the skirts are going to work. So I've been trying to kind of puzzle this over in my head. If you remember from the last video, which if you haven't seen the last video, I will link that down below. But if you remember from the last video, I opted to do a circle skirt and I cut one panel for like the whole back going to the side seam, and then there's two panels in the front because it has this like bias trim opening in the front. But that was kind of what I was trying to decide was, do I want it to be an actual opening or a fake opening? With a fake opening, I would then have a side zipper instead of having like an actual opening down the side. And I am slightly worried that I'm making the wrong decision, but I think I am going to go with a button front opening. Now, in my inspiration image, you can't see any buttons. That's why I'm worried that I'm making the wrong decision. But I kind of argued myself out of that idea by the fact that, like, although you can't see any buttons, they could be white on white. And now that I'm thinking about it, I should probably check to make sure that I have buttons before actually making this decision, because part of this decision was the appeal of making this entirely from the stash and therefore not having to run to Joann's to actually get a zipper to go inside. But I didn't check to see if I have white buttons. So I'm actually going to take a little pause for a moment right there and go see if I have some buttons. All right, I'm back. So not only did I find some buttons, but I actually found a couple of button options. So my initial thought was to go with kind of a medium size white plain button, something kind of like this one right here, if you can see that. I don't have enough of these though to do the entire front. I do have smaller, like semi-clear-ish, but they're kind of on the creamy side buttons, and I don't really like that idea. However, I have two other options, honestly, maybe even three other options that I could totally do. So I just have to decide which one I want to do. Okay, this one I love the idea of, but it's not from the 1950s. But look at these little pink flowers. Like, it's very on theme. But since it's not from the 50s, it's probably a no-go. Okay, this one though, I'm pretty sure that they did have buttons like this in the 1950s. This is white, which I like because it'll blend in a little bit better. It might be a tiny bit on the small side, but look at those little hearts. And they actually have little flowers in them. I don't know if you can tell that or not, but there's little flowers like engraved into them, which is very, very cute. And then I actually also have buttons that are vintage buttons. Now these are pink. My guess from looking at them is that they're honestly probably from the 60s. I think they'd work anyway. They are these, which again look kind of flowery. It's really the size I was going for. So that might be really cute. So I think it's going to be either the hearts or the pink. It's like the perfect shade of pink for the flowers on the fabric too, but it is a very different pink than what I'm using for the binding. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, like if it's too much of a contrast, because this is that pink. You can see how different it is, but this is the flower pink and it's spot on. So yeah, okay, well I can do buttons at least, so that's good news. I will choose one of those two buttons for my outfit. And yes, I know doing a bazillion buttonholes all the way down an outfit is actually a lot more work than putting in a side zipper. But again, I would have to go to the store to get the zippers, so buttons it is. But to prepare for buttons, it means that I have to do additional work, because you can't just put buttons in a single layer of fabric. So like, kind of one of my initial thoughts was like, okay, great. So on the skirt, we just have, you know, piece, this, let's say, is the front piece. We're just going to take our double fold binding and put it over the piece like that. However, if I'm putting buttonholes right here next to that, that is not enough structure to have buttonholes in. You need like minimum 2 layers of cotton, really, to be able to do buttonholes. So I need a facing for that front edge, even though it's gonna have binding on the edge. So I'm just gonna do that out of cotton muslin. Likewise, you really shouldn't put buttons like attached to just one single layer of cotton either. So I'm gonna do a facing on the other side too. Plus that way I can have my floral. I might do the facing on the underside. I think I might do that facing with the floral, because that way I can have the floral like lap underneath. I think that's probably going to be a better idea, and then it will turn around and get folded down so you don't see a raw edge, and so that there's something a little heftier for the buttons to attach to. So basically my underside facing is going to be about twice as wide as my facing that's going to have the binding on it, because the underside facing is going to go under here and then come back around this way. I hope that that makes sense. That's how I do like placket facings, button placket facings. And I don't know if that's how everyone does them, but that is how I do them. You just kind of need that extra. So yeah, hopefully that made sense. Okay, so I'm gonna go and start working on those facings, and I'm also gonna go ahead and sew my skirt pieces together. That will take me like a minute because there's no inseam pockets, which is so odd for me, but I don't need inseam pockets when I've got my huge tulip pockets. And I think that once I have the skirt pieces together and faced, I think then I will probably go ahead and start doing all of the binding on the tulips. So that will be coming up next. So this is facing number one. This is the one where the skirt is like on the outside as opposed to the other side is the underlap side. So this one is 2.5 inches wide, and then the length of the front of the skirt, of course. And now that it's been sewn on, it is going to get pressed flat, but then it's actually also going to get pressed back this way after I press this edge right here. You can really press it kind of in any order, but I do recommend pressing it flat like this first, because that'll give you a nice clean edge before you fold it back and press it. And then you can just do this press at any time. And now this is what it looks like pressed into place. Now, of course, we didn't really need the super clean edge right here since I am planning to do the binding over the edge, but at least it looks nice anyway. And if you weren't to do binding, you would want this really nice clean edge like I have here. Now with this side right here, you can next do one of a few things. You can either stitch it down by machine, but of course you will see the machine stitching on the other side. You could also do a whip stitch by hand where you'd only get like a tiny little thread or two of the other side with each stitch, or you can also kind of risk it, pin it in place for now, and stitch the buttonholes on this area. Like we're gonna do binding probably and then buttonholes, so buttonholes won't be for a little while, but you can kind of just hold this in place mostly by buttonholes. Now, to be honest, I don't think I'm gonna do that with this one, because generally speaking, if you were to do that, you would probably want more like a deeper of a fold here, because frankly my buttonholes are not going to be wide enough with these sizes of buttons to actually catch that edge and stitch it down. So most likely I'm going to go ahead and stitch this down by hand. That said, I am going to wait until after this is attached to the bodice to actually do that, because I need to be able to access this flat up here when I'm attaching it to the bodice. Now for the other side, you can see I've got the facing that matches. This is the underlap where the buttons are going to get attached to. And for this side, I want to press the seam allowance towards this facing right here. And I'm also going to press this edge in, and then I am going to press it like this so that it just covers where that seam allowance is with that all pressed in, and that creates our nice facing where the buttons will be attached to. And this is what it looks like pressed into place. Now, as long as you have pressed it so that it just covers this stitch line right here, the seam, you can actually now pin this in place, flip it over, and just machine stitch in the ditch right here, and that will catch this entire side here, and it will take almost no time whatsoever. And just like that, the inner placket is all done. This is what it looks like in the inside. You can see the little stitch line there. And now our placket is just done until we go to actually put buttonholes and buttons in it. So that means that I can now move on to pockets. So I've actually decided that I wanted to line these pockets because I was worried about the flowers from the skirt showing through the outside of the pocket and just kind of messing with the look. I also do want them to be a little bit stronger, especially since I'm going to be applying so much of the binding to them. So I'm just going to baste the lining in place. I'm not going to like serge the edges or anything because everything is going to be encased, and serging this sounds like a nightmare. So yeah, I'm just going to baste them on the sewing machine. And then once I have basted those, I can start applying the binding. So for the binding, I'm going to start with the narrow binding, which is basically half the width of the double fold. So it's like once you fold this, then it equals the narrow. And with the narrow, I'm not 100% positive if I'm going to do like how exactly I'm going to do this yet, but with the narrow for sure, I am going to start by doing these like middle bits of the tulip. I really can't do this with one hand, but basically it's going to kind of curve and then come back down to here, and also same thing over here. Then after that, I am torn on whether I want to use this and just kind of like attach it flat to the skirt. I just feel like it's kind of not going to be wide enough to really like actually make these secure and strong if I have to cover both sides of that. So I'm kind of thinking I'm just going to go around the entire outside with the double fold. Obviously up here I'm going to have a lot of like folding and, you know, fiddling to get it into all of those shapes, those nooks, etc. and peaks, but I think that will work well. And then I'm probably just going to machine sew like around the edge part of it to the actual skirt once the binding is all on. For the transferring of these lines, by the way, what I'm doing is I'm drawing one on, then I'm going to fold it over and put pins in so that I know like where to mark from the other side. And then I'm going to do both of that together and basically have one with the other one behind it like that, and transfer with pins all of the markings to the other piece. That way everything can be symmetrical. The bias tape is mostly all on, and I feel like I have two very pretty retro looking pot holders. But I think they'll make good pockets as well. I say mostly all on because basically the way that I applied all of this double fold trim around the edge was just to sandwich it and do, or try to do, both sides at once. For the most part, that did work. However, there are a few places where it just didn't catch on the other side, and it happened on both of these where there's just a few little places. So I'm going to go ahead and whip stitch the other ones, and because I've got the lining, it won't show through to the front, which is great. But yeah, just whip stitching those little places should be just fine. And then once I'm ready to add these onto the skirt, which I don't think I'm ready to do that yet. I think I'm going to wait until I have the bodice attached and stuff too. But at that point, I will just add, I think, another line of stitching right along the edge right here, just to stitch this all in place. And then of course it will also get incorporated with the stem motif that comes down onto the skirt that's made out of the bias tape as well. That will be made out of the single fold like these ones are here. So before I go ahead and add things like the skirt sleeves, buttonholes, etc., I did want to actually put on the bodice one more time, since you might remember from the end of the last video that I had not actually done that in like the final fabric. So here we are, have it on. There are a couple of tweaks that I need to make, but overall it is really pretty good. One is when I put the darts in here, we kind of got like this weird part that sticks out, and that just needs to get cut back and away, and then that'll be dandy. And then the other is that I don't think I ever actually took up the length of the back, and it is still a little too long. So I do have to shorten the back just in the center there, but I think that is it. I think everything else seems pretty darn good, which means that once I take care of those two things, that I can go ahead and start attaching this to other pieces. I don't think I have time to get to the sleeves right now before I have to leave for the show. So I think instead what I would rather do is go ahead and attach the skirt to the bodice, which I know does then make it like kind of more cumbersome when I go to do the sleeves, but I just know that since I'm drafting the sleeves myself, that is probably going to take more than an hour and a half, and I would rather just get the skirt attached, because once I have the skirt attached, it means I can also add the binding on the edge and do the buttonholes. So I'm hoping I can get through some of the buttonholes maybe today before I have to go to the show, but I am also realizing now that I really thought this dress was going to get finished this week, but today's Friday, and it's Friday afternoon right now, and I have a 2-show day tomorrow, which means no sewing whatsoever unless it is handwork. So I'm going to do things like whip stitching those few places on the pockets tomorrow at the show or between shows, and I would love to be able to get to a point where I have like buttonholes in so that I can then also do buttons while I'm there. So fingers crossed, I'm going to stop talking and get to work on those little tweaks and attaching the skirt. The skirt and bodice are now attached, and the binding is now on all the way around the neckline and the front closure. That's the side that laps over there. Hopefully this all matches up. It should, because that's how I had it like when I was trying it on, that it matches up with 1.5 inches in from the edge over here. Oh, by the way, I did also make a placket because I realized that like the skirt portion down here, I had made the placket for it, but the bodice portion actually didn't have a placket. It just kind of ended here, and now that I made a skirt placket, I needed a bodice one. So you can see like the seam wound up actually lapping onto this side, but it's still just going to be overlapped by this, so it doesn't matter. And then it came around to the back and it lines up with the placket there as well. So now that the binding is on, I do have a bunch of hand sewing to do. First off, there were a few places where it was missed, especially around like corners I noticed, or like thicker places like the waist. I've got a little bit where I've got to do just a little bit of hand sewing. And then I do still need to sew down by hand the inside of this front part of the placket, just so that it, you know, tries to not show quite so much. Like you'll see a little bit of a prick stitch on this side here since it's unlined. The bodice is lined, so there won't be any evidence of it there. But yeah, so hand sewing to do there, and also the bits on the inside of the tulip binding. And hopefully I will get at least some of that done at the show tonight. And then I think we will be able to move on to buttonholes and buttons. Though, speaking of buttons, here is my dilemma. So as you can see, I have a few of the flower buttons that I kind of like, you know, discounted, said that I wasn't going to use because they're too modern on here. And as you can probably tell, they are freaking adorable. I also tried these buttons at first. They also look quite cute. However, I did the math right here, and I think that I want to place my buttons approximately 2 inches apart, but this entire thing all the way down here is 43 inches, meaning that I would need about 21 buttons if I were to place them 2 inches apart. So this style of button, I have 15 of them. This style of button, I have 16 of them. So I don't have enough of either. These are vintage. There's literally no way that I could get more, at least reliably. These I've been trying to look up online because they are this one right here, JHB, like I saved this. I can't find them anymore. It's been years since I bought these. It was probably honestly like 10 years ago. So that's probably why. The heart buttons, as you can see, I have a ton. So like that would not be a problem to use the heart buttons. But now that I've seen how cute the flower buttons are on here, I just don't know if the heart buttons, which are also really quite small. I mean, the heart buttons, you like can't even tell that they exist, which, I mean, I guess that was kind of what I was originally going for, is for them to blend in a whole lot, but they just seem so small, and these ones are so cute. So one other option that I have is, of course, I could do buttons like as far down as I can. I did the math, and with the 15 buttons, I would have to place them, if I were to do all the way down, I would have to place them 2.8 inches apart, which is really just too far apart. I mean, that would absolutely gap open around the bust. around the skirt, it would probably be okay. So I guess another option might be to do my 2 inches here and then space them out further on the skirt. Maybe that would work. Or is to do 2 inches regularly all the way down and just sew the skirt shut, the bottom like 10 inches, and not have any buttons there. It might look a little weird, but that is another option as well. So I'm trying to weigh all my button options right now, but I will be back to do buttonholes later. So now that everything is attached and the binding is on and all of that, I decided I should put it on one more time before really deciding on buttons. And I'm glad I did, because what hadn't occurred to me is the fact that with this style that I've done here with the binding, it is the binding that is the center of the dress. Therefore, if I put buttons on over here, they're actually off center. And I don't know about you, but I feel like that would really, really bother me to have like two things kind of trying to compete for the center. So I think I'm actually going to nix the buttons entirely. I'm really glad that I put this on before I started doing buttonholes. Yeah, I guess I probably didn't need to do all of that placket work. What I'm kind of thinking of doing at this point, I mean, I could still go back, sew it all the way down the front, and add in like an invisible zipper on the side. I could do that. But what I'm actually kind of thinking is to sew it all the way closed except for like probably right at the waist, and then do some hooks and bars at the waist, because really, like, I don't need to worry about getting on the rest of it, I don't think. I mean, it is possible that maybe I will then realize that I've regret that and I actually need hooks and bars like up here as well. But doing hooks and bars just at the waist would really give me the same effect as having a side zip. And I think that it would look the same. So yeah, that is my plan, just to stitch down probably to about like here, like right under the bust, and then start again stitching from here to the hem, and then do hooks and bars right in this little section right here. So I've got about a half hour before I need to leave for today's show. I would love to be able to do some of the hooks and bars backstage during the show, because I wound up actually finishing all of my hand sewing yesterday. Yesterday was our 2-show day, and I wound up finishing the hand sewing like after the first show, or during the first show, so I didn't really have anything to do during the second show, because I was supposed to originally be sewing on buttons at that point, but I hadn't had time to do the buttonholes, thank goodness. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stitch down the edge here, and then hopefully be able to add the hooks and bars while I'm at the show today. So I know that just like the end of the last video, I look a little crusty or strange with my post-show hair and makeup, but as you can see, I have the dress on. It is no longer pinned shut. It is sewn shut, other than right here where I did put the hooks and bars on while I was at today's show. I've also added the other pocket, so both pockets are on now as well. Now, all of that said, unfortunately, I've run out of time for sewing this week. We're so close to finishing this project, but it's gonna have to be one more video, and let me tell you what all is left. So obviously, sleeves. The most obvious thing that needs to be done with this is the sleeves, drafting the tulip sleeves specifically. So I think that honestly, that is kind of going to be the bulk of the subject of next week's video. I've never drafted tulip sleeves before, but I'm gonna learn how to do it, and I'm gonna teach you guys how to do it as well so that you can draft your own tulip sleeves. So that will be coming next week. Definitely look for that. And then the other 3 things I think that I need to do on this outfit. For one thing, it does not have a hem yet. I'm pretty darn positive that I want to use bias binding on the hem so that I get that pink edge all the way around the hem. I have already actually looked at the like evenness of the hem in the mirror. Somehow it looks like none of it dropped out. Like, it doesn't look like any parts are longer than others. So I think hem-wise, all I have to do, literally, put bias binding on, probably make more bias binding, and put the bias binding on, and I should be golden on that. And then the last 2 other things. One is unfortunately a fit issue. So I think you can see how it's standing up away from my neck up here. And that's a bit of an issue because unlike what I normally do, I did not have a center back seam in this outfit. Pretty much everything that I ever make has a center back seam, and I taper in the top of the back because I know that maybe going along with narrow shoulders or whatever, but I know that my back curves inwards to my neck. I didn't do that with this because I didn't have a center back seam. And then of course I put the binding on, and the binding exacerbated the problem that I hadn't noticed was there when I was just wearing it as a bodice. So I'm not 100% positive what to do with that. I'm probably going to put the sleeves on first and then determine what I want to do with that. I mean, I don't know if it would like bother me with it the way it is right now. I generally always wear my hair down, so like people aren't gonna see that it's sticking up away from my body for one thing. And the only kind of option that I would have is, I guess there's like a option A and B-ish part, but I would have to kind of make a little dart in the back of the neck to remove the excess. And I could either do that with the bias binding still on, which would be quite bulky, or I could potentially maybe like take the bias binding off in that section, remove a tiny bit of it, like seam it smaller, and take the dart and redo the binding. So I think that's kind of the two options of what I could do to fix it, because it's not like there's a break in the binding there currently. Likewise, there's no seam. So yeah, that is unfortunate. And then the one other thing that I decided I wanted to do is, I showed you this earlier with some of the narrow bias tape around the waist. And I personally never really like a narrow waistband like this, but I do really like the way that this looks having the pink around the waist. So I'm gonna make myself a belt. So next week, again, bulk of it is gonna be sleeves and how to make a belt. I'm hoping that I might still have like a, this is how you do a fabric covered belt buckle kit thing left. I don't know if I have one of those, and they're relatively hard to find. So I'm gonna have to go through my stash and double check, because that would be really great if I could do like a fabric covered belt buckle, and I can show you how to do those. Oh, and actually there is one other thing that I nearly forgot, that in fact I'm gonna have to remove the very bottom little bit of the pockets, because it just dawned on me I haven't put the stems on yet, the stems with the leaves, and that was why I made all of this bias tape. So clearly I have enough of it. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do that in next week's video as well. So maybe I'm not quite as close as I thought I was, but I think that everything should be able to get finished next week, no problem, and hopefully to take some nice pictures of the cherry blossoms. So that is going to be it for me for today. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon, and if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with my sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks right here on YouTube. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon, Mirage, Laura, Jean, and Janelle. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!